Not on yet.
Okay, anyway, Baruch, good to see you. We are on page 167. Please mute your phone, your screens, please. Page 167 in the Maamar Hatei Elikai Oznecha from 1934, authored by the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, in the Sefer HaMaimorim Melukotim, Volume 2. So we're discussing here the position of the philosophers, the Umas HaOlam, who used the idea that Hashem, that God, is a spiritual entity. And because he's spiritual, he relates just to that, and anything that's outside of the category of spirituality, he has no interest in that, and in fact, he gives it away to others to take care of. Who are the others? The stars, the constellations, etc. And they use the pasuk, or Chasidus uses the pasuk of Ram al kol goyim Hashem, exalted are you over all nations, God. So the literal meaning, Yoni, of the pasuk is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so exalted, greater than anything and anyone. But the way Chasidus interprets the verse, and it's no contradiction, Chasidus says, they say that Hashem, in other words, the last word in that quote, Ram al kol goyim Hashem, they say that the last word, Hashem, is Ram. He's exalted. He's above humanity. He's above humanity. That's the way they put their philosophy and ideology into the verse. And Chasidus says that this is not a Jewish belief because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just as much here as he is there. Here meaning in the Gashmias as he is in the Ruchnias. And this is a fundamental principle in Torah, or better said, this is a fundamental principle as a Yid, as a Jew, who's a Maimon, a believer. You must believe this. If you must. You don't must anything, but if you want to be considered a Maimon, this is a primary belief. Good afternoon, Yonason. So, let's continue. Oh, so what's the words that Chasidus uses about this belief? Elokah delakaya. They say that they have 100% belief in God. As far as an existence, a Metzias HaKeil, Elokah. But they say that this Elokah, because he's Elokah, he's able and he does give over part of his divinity, his Elokah, his godliness. He inserts that into the stars and the constellations, and we call them Elokaya, gods, plural, right? Elokah means one God. Elokaya means of all gods, of all forces. He is the force of all forces. When you say that, Baruch, you are acknowledging there are other forces that can do things in the universe, in the world. This, Chasidus says, is not emunah. It's not the Jewish belief, and it's for us heresy. It's not. You're not allowed to, we don't believe that way. You're not allowed to believe that way. Otherwise, it's heresy. But
is he referring to Kishuf?
To what?
Kishuf.
I don't hear you. To what? Ki?
Is he referring to Kishuf?
Oh, and that's a discussion in the Rambam, and the Rebbe in 1957, I believe, said a Maamar, and in the Maamar, I think Basi Lagani, in that Maamar of Tavshin Yud Zayin, he touches upon this, and basically, if my memory serves me well, the Rambam believes that this is a heresy for a Jew. The idea, it's not kishuf the way we know it in the classical sense. I think that you're thinking of magic. No. it's not kishuv. It's called in Chasidus. It's called shituf, shin yud tuf vav and langefei, partnership. Now, the Christian belief, Trinity, is partners. God has partners. For a Jew, that's heresy. For a non-Jew, according to the Rambam, I believe, it's not considered heresy. A non-Jew is allowed to believe that. But for a Jew, it's heresy. That's why to walk into a church or an edifice which has that belief for a Jew is wrong, is not acceptable, is not proper. But for a Jew to walk into a mosque, as far as I know, there's no sin. You're allowed to, although you shouldn't, because the tumah is maybe even greater. The spiritual impurity is even greater. But halachically, since the Muslims, they believe in one God who has no partners, so as far as belief, it's not heresy. Whereas Trinity has that other belief, God has partners. This idea here, whether Elokad Elokaya also it means that God has partners, I'm not sure. But if it means that, then for us, it's heresy. If it doesn't mean that, meaning like this, that they believe there is only one God, but this God allows other creations who are not his partners to have divine energy. This discussion, have you come across this? Have you learned it in your younger years? Do you know about what I'm talking about? Baruch, Moshe, Hillel, Yoni, Moshe Myers. Have you read up about this? Okay.
A little, yeah. I touched on things like different forces in the world, but...
No, I'm not talking about different forces. I'm talking about a Rambam. Have you learned the Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah? So, you have. Okay, good. So, you have some homework. I'm giving you some homework. Doesn't have to be tonight. But in this week, take out the laws of Yesodei HaTorah, which is right at the beginning of the Rambam, in Yad HaChazaka, and read that section. You should find it. It shouldn't be difficult. And you'll get warmed up to the idea that we're discussing. But Hillel, do you hear what I'm asking? I'm asking, is this belief of that the philosophers had, that Hashem is Elokad Elokaya, is that tantamount to Shituf, which according to the Rambam is forbidden for a Jew to believe in? That's my question. I think, the answer is no. Although in this Maamar and in other Maamorim, the language of the Rebbe and the Rabbeim, it's not appropriate to think that. But I'm not asking Maamar wise. I'm asking halacha wise, Rambam wise. That's a different analysis. And at the same time, I point out to you, this is an important overall teaching when we learn. You have to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. If you're looking from the halachic perspective, you got to stay with halacha. If you're looking from the Hasidic perspective, you stay with Chasidus. They're not a contradiction. It's two realms of reality. But so that's why when we learn and we ask and we dissect, we have to really be clear what mahalach, what approach are we looking to address. Anyway, regardless, let's get back to the Maamar. So in this Maamar, yes?
One thing we mentioned yesterday, a story about when you were in Culver They asked you to speak there, right? So I'm assuming that you didn't want to speak in the sanctuary because of this thing, because of the problem of that they don't consider Hashem to be the only God.
No. The policy of my employer, Rabbi Kunin, may he be well, was that no Chabad rabbi, shliach, and rav should enter a non-Orthodox sanctuary. Now, it could be that that's the way the ruling came down from the Rav. And it could be came from the Rebbe. And if we look into Moshe Feinstein's Chuvas, his response, we see that he invalidates. I don't know if you know this, but do you know that Moshe invalidates a marriage of a reform or conservative clergyman? I use the word clergyman because I once interviewed Rabbi David Hollander. He was known as David Hollander. He was originally a rabbi of a very large shul in the Bronx, and then he moved over to the Brighton Beach Jewish Center. And in the 50s, he was appointed as the RCA leader. And he was very outspoken against the conservative movement. And the RCA, although Orthodox, but they tried to keep the peace, and, at that time for sure, they didn't want to, really stir up things, because it was in the 50s, a lot of history here. In the 50s, that's when Rabbi Aaron Kotler called all the main Rosh Hashivas and asked them to sign a letter separating themselves from what was called at the time the Synagogue Council. The Synagogue Council was like all the shuls and synagogue, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, sit together for meetings to improve the Jewish community. Rabbi Aaron was very feisty and fiery and a kanoi for Torah, and he said absolutely not, because he saw what was happening. Initially, it was conservadox, but it was really going to the left. So many Rabbonim and Rebbes, whoever the Rebbe, pulled away from that. But Rabbi Aaron wanted to formalize it. He did formalize it. The only one of the Rosh Hashivas who did not sign was Rabbi Soloveitchik, and that's a story for itself. It's in my book, Rav Rebbe, at length. He did not sign, and they were very upset with him, and maybe that was the one of the main reasons they shunned him. I think that was maybe the main reason, even more than him joining Mizrahi in the mid-40s. He left the Aguda and he joined the Mizrahi. But the real, as we say in Yiddish, patch and punim, slap in the face, was when he refused to sign that letter. I mean, that was too much for them. And I think that's why at Rabbi Aaron Kotler's Levaya, although the world's greatest eulogizer was Rabbi Soloveitchik, if you've ever heard him give a eulogy, there was no one like him who was able to give such a eulogy. In English, for sure, and even in Yiddish. And he came, and I heard from someone who was standing and sitting next to him that he was not even summoned up to the dais. He was like a dog in the background. Now, Rabbi Aaron Kotler already had died, so it was his entourage and people around him who were calling the shots and humiliated the Rav that way. But the Rav, took certain stances that really alienated the right-wing Orthodox community. So getting back to this, the RCA was very much close to the conservative movement, but they were Orthodox. Rabbi Hollander, without his beard, he was a firebrand for Orthodoxy. I knew this man. And he said it the way it is, and he wasn't embarrassed of anyone. and he made a storm, and they fired him. The RCA fired him and said, we can't have you as our leader. Although you're right, you know, what the conservative movement is doing is outrageous. They were taking out selections in davening that were you know, about the Beis Hamikdash and Moshiach and sacrifices. They said it's not relevant today. We don't have that, and they were really moving to the left. But the RCA said, although you're right, you can't speak this way because it just brings divisiveness. He didn't care, but he lost his job. He told me this, and he was a proponent of this all his life. Years later, either in the 70s or 80s, he was at a Farbrengen. He became very close to the Rebbe, very close. And he noticed so he wouldn't, he taught me, he wouldn't use the word conservative rabbi or reform rabbi. He would call them conservative clergymen. Clergymen. So I sometimes say clergymen. So he was at a Farbrengen and he noticed a conservative clergyman on the dais behind the Rebbe. And he was so upset, he picked himself up and he walked out of the Farbrengen. And the Rebbe noticed it. The next day, the Rebbe had Rabbi Chaim Dalfin, a secretary, call him to say the following in Yiddish. Kommt doch nicht zu euch, kommt zu mir. He didn't come, he's not to you, he's coming to me. And the Rebbe's short words mean, I have a different way of dealing with the issue. By him, first of all, the Rebbe didn't invite and tell people where to sit. So for some reason, somehow, someone who brought him to the Farbrengen, this clergyman, put him on the dais. So don't blame me. That's one thing. And number two, let me deal with it. Lubavitch, Chabad, this is what I was telling Yoni the other day when he was calling for a fire brimstone against the conservative and reform and all that. The Rebbe said, we have a way in Lubavitch to deal with them, with the whole movement. And it's not your way, we understand. And the Rebbe is not saying that you shouldn't do it your way. I want you to realize that. The Rebbe didn't tell Rabbi Hollander that what he's doing is wrong. No. He was a kanoi. He was a Pinchas. And we need that. But it's not our mahalach. It's not our approach. Parenthetically, Moshe Myers, I see he's lost. He's not on the screen, but he's been asking me over the last few months about, the Mashiach, the Corona Mashiach. So I answered him, and I continue to answer people. You're not the only one who asked me. It's not the Chabad approach, to go and point. This is a sign of Mashiach. If and when the Rebbe said something, he's a tzaddik. He sees. I don't see. I see you on the screen, you see me, and zehu. But the greater global impact, the ruchnis, you have to be a tzaddik. Now, does that mean to say you can't say, it seems like, it feels like, there's a possibility? Absolutely. So I'm not poo-pooing the idea that the corona, explosion is not an issue that Hashem sent it, and obviously to make things closer to Mashiach. I agree. But, who is to say, one rabbi says everyone should make Aliyah now, the other rabbi says, this is not the Lubavitch style. You should just know that. And it doesn't mean to say if you have another, it doesn't mean to say if you do believe otherwise, you can't be a Lubavitcher. I'm not saying that. But there is a certain mahalach, just like the Litvish have their mahalach, the Sephardim have their approach, we have our approach. So Rabbi Hollander's approach, as correct as it was, it's not Lubavitch. So the Rebbe was telling him that, you didn't need to leave the Farbrengen. He didn't come to you. If he came to you and you stormed out, I understand. But he came to me, and we have a different approach. Now, why did I bring up this whole thing with the conservative? Does anyone remember? I just went on.
Yeah, we were discussing the Rambam and the whole issue of Shituf.
Oh, right.
You were asking,
Right. So I'm just saying that you have to be clear when you ask such a question that I'm asking. You have to look at the sources, and you have to, see. And you can't say, "Well, Chasidus says we're learning here that it's apikursis." Yes. What?
you had posed a question earlier. I wanted to respond to.
Go ahead.
You said whether I thought the issue of the philosophers Elakaya, it was like the issue of Shituf, and I agree with you. I do not think that they're the same. I think that the Elakaya, the idea that of God's operating within God, so to speak, is more like the Rambam describes the descent into Avodah Zarah. That people ascribing powers to celestial forces that they could relate to more than the abstraction of Hashem.
Okay, but does the Rambam say that that falls into the category of Avodah Zarah?
He describes that as kind of the descent or the transition into Avodah Zarah. I don't remember if he says L'halacha that was Avodah Zarah, but
right.
He describes how Avodah Zarah developed, so to speak, in the world.
Okay, so
as a kind of shortcut.
So we have our work cut out for us. We should look into the Rambam, to know what the Rambam says, and anyone that can get a hold of that's Maamar Basiligani, 1950, I think it's 57. At your leisure, see what the Rebbe says about this, because there are also Mara Makomos over there to the Rambam and other Svarim. But I want to get back to what we're learning here. We're on page... Yes.
I'm sorry, can I just ask you one last question?
Yes.
Going back for a
Not one last. You can ask more, but right now, one last question.
Okay. I'm just curious, on a very practical level. I totally get it. Everything you mentioned about the clergy, conservative clergy, or however you said it now in this context. But I'm curious, a person who's out in the world, a person who's a Chabad, who's a Lubavitch Shaliach, whether you're a Chabad Shaliach, not a Chabad Shaliach, a Rav, and whatever. Either way, if you're, I've been in situations a number of times where I've had to deal with, conservative clergy, reform, etc., different times in my life and so forth, especially if it's sensitive family issues, etc. We just had this issue when my father-in-law passed away, etc., with my mother-in-law. And, okay, question though, Lamaisa, how would one... you have to address the person. You have to address him sometimes in front of other people, maybe in front of his constituents. It can be very tricky if you don't call him. On the one hand, I totally get it. Why would we refer to him as a rabbi, etc.? Obvious, but how would, practically speaking, though, how would we? How does one navigate the situation? And listen, it could be that there's no cut and dry answer. I'm asking
right. Right. I've had that question for years. I would say, I would say that in public, in front of people, you should definitely address him with the title rabbi. Otherwise, it's humiliating a Jew, and you're not allowed to do that. That's even a greater sin. And there's no sin to say rabbi so-and-so. There's no sin. The Rebbe, I think, told the Tzach, Lubavitch Youth Organization, over the years, and Rabbi Costel, who dealt with a lot of these issues, shared last year that the Rebbe, I think, said, if you're writing a letter, the inside of the letter, you write Rabbi so-and-so. And on the envelope, you don't write Rabbi. But, I think that's what he said. But that... You can't say that's what I'm going to do. You have to look at it, But overall, I don't agree with. Who am I? But Chabad does not agree overall with Rabbi Hollander's, zealotry. And no, I understand. So I'm answering. The answer is, to be ish bein ha'anoshim. Now this began because you or Yoni, one of you asked me. Yoni, in the Culver City, that was reform, by the way, Yoni. That wasn't conservative. So that's why I started to mention to you that we did not go in to the sanctuary. But I want to tell you something. There were shluchim and big shluchim from the first shluchim who did go into the sanctuary of conservative and maybe even reform. I want to tell you that. That's for the record. They're not going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. Okay? I know who they are. And it seems like, because Rav Moshe Feinstein doesn't write anywhere, you're forbidden. You're not that. If you're davening there, Rav Moshe says you shouldn't daven there. You're not davening there. You're going to a social event. That's why I said to you, Hillel, could you please mute your phone, your screen? Hillel, please mute it.
My phone is...
No, there's Hillel Rosenfeld. I'm talking to Hillel Rosenfeld. Anyway, so that's why I said the policy of Chabad in California, the policy was not to go into the sanctuary, but the policy in other cities was otherwise. So what do we see from that, Moshe? It's not cut and dry. It's not cut and dry. And I would say, depending on where you are, you have to ask the Rabbanim of that city as a Lubavitcher, if you to follow Lubavitch. If you're not a Lubavitcher, ask the Litvish Rabbanim, the Svardish Rabbanim, and you do as they paskin. Okay, we got to continue the Maamar, otherwise we can talk all day off our brain, and it's beautiful, but right now we have to learn some Chasidus inside. Page 167, and we're here, the Zehu, that's about 8-9 lines from the top. The last word on the line. The Zehu, Masha Anachnu Kol B'nei Yisrael Leimrim. We all say in davening, right, at the end of the first bracha called Yetzer right, before Shema, not Avas Olam, but the one before. Quote, Hamachadish B'tuva B'chol Yom Tomim Masav Reishis. We laud Hashem that He renews with goodness every day, constantly, the act of creation. It says, you enliven everything. Come along the sages and they say, quote, Al tikre mechaya. Don't read the word as mechaya. Mechaya means to enliven. Ela mehave. Create. Not only does Hashem enliven the world constantly, every moment, from anew, but He actually creates it from anew. We call this, what do we call this, Baruch? We call this Chidush Yesh Miayin, Hamchadish Betuvei. Shahu Yizbarach, let's continue inside Mahavu, Machayas Kol Navareim B'chol Yom B'chol Eish B'chol Rega. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates and enlivens all of creation every day. Look at these three terms. Mark it down, Moshe. B'chol Yom is one. B'chol Eish, at all time. U'B'chol Rega, every moment. Every Rega. V'asher al Kain, Yeshua's Hashem Kerafayin. What a wonderful insert of the Rebbe here. Therefore, the help of Hashem, the salvation of God, is immediate, keherifying, like the blink of the eye. Why does he throw this in? Because Hashem is constantly here every moment. So this moment, Yeshua's Hashem can come, keherifying, you blink your eye, it's already Yeshua. If Hashem wasn't here every moment, and if he had a 5-second interval, he enlivens the world, excuse me, he creates the world for 5 minutes, he takes a 5-minute break, and he comes back in 5 minutes. Then you can't say Yeshua's Hashem keherifayim. You can say Yeshua's Hashem b'chamesh ragayim. But since it's b'chol eis uv'chol rega, therefore Yeshua Hashem Kerafai. Hanocha hayesoidis, the foundational premise, be'inyan ha'isavus, regarding creation that we just mentioned, he das haTorah. It's not das haChasidus. It's das haTorah. It's the opinion of Torah, shehi hadeo amitis. This line is also, every line here you could kiss and hug. Shehi hadeo amitis. Das Torah is deo amitis. You understand? If you want to know what truth, what deo amitis means in a true opinion, it's das Torah. And I don't mean today's conventional das Torah. I'm not going that direction. That'll be in my next book. I have a lot about das Torah. What is true das Torah and what is baloney das Torah, or wannabe das Torah. But we mean das Torah. You look into the Torah, and the Torah says and establishes what is truth. And what is that? That the creation of the worlds is in a manner called his chachus, a novelty, a chidush, his chachut. And lo, yoni b'derech ilav olu, but not in a manner of cause and effect. So again, Hashem creates the world Yonason, b'derech yesh mi'ayin, which we call chidush. It's not that there's a cause and effect, and as you're going to see now, why yesh mi'ayin is so different. It's in a different category completely than ilav olu. Let's see what he says. The ilav olu, when it comes to cause and effect, hurak gilui mahelim levad. These words we didn't have earlier in the Maamar. I point that out to you. Ilav olu, the style and manner in which the olu, the effect, comes from the ilah, is in a manner called revelation of concealment. Gilui ahelim. And he explains, the whole olu, every effect, who kolol biyulosei tchila, is initially incorporated in its cause. Uva is galus mahelim, and when it comes into the realm of effect, it's a revelation of what was concealed before. Right? The feeling. Do you know that there's a notion of feeling, a notion in the cup, in the head? There's no actual midah, right, Baruch? A midah, an actual emotion, is in the heart, an emotion in its palpable sense. But the notion of an emotion is generated where? Barosh, in the moach, when you study and understand something. When it comes into the heart, it's gilui hahelim. It's a revelation of what there was before concealed. This is true for anything that's in the classification and category of gilui of ilu v'olu. Conversely, let's continue inside. But the creation of all worlds, einoi kain, is not so. Rather, it's new. His chachut. Vahainu. What does that mean? Says the Rebbe, this means b'derech ein aroch. There is no erech. There is no association between the creator and the creation. There is no place in the creator before creation for creation. You hear that? None. Zero. And in fact, Chasidus says elsewhere even more so. It can't be. Did you hear that? It can't be. The creation, as its pre-creation, is not only that it's not, it can't be. It's like the gravitational force bringing the rock to fall on the earth while it's flying, it says in what I think in one place in a Maamar, my mashpia of Melech taught us this, that there's an actual force when you throw it that's contrary to the force of heaviness. The force of flightiness is not only not heaviness, it's contrary to heaviness. So when we say that creation doesn't exist before it was created, it's not only it doesn't exist, it can exist. And nevertheless, that non-existence in God decided to create. That's what we call a chidush. So we have here a very important insight to what a chidush is. A chidush is not something that there's a potential and possibility to be, and if I study it well, it will come forth. That's Ila v'Ol. There was no room and no place in the God, in Hashem, as a creator for creation. But when Hashem decided, I want creation, something new happened. Creation in its embryonic form came to be. The Yisavos, and this creation is not just from a spiritual place in God. And here we have to point out the difference between spirituality and transcendence, which I keep on saying in all of the Maamorim that we learn. They're not the same. And this is a mistake that many make a mistake. They compare and think spirituality is atzmus, is essence. Wrong. Spirituality is a box. Like I told you yesterday. The guy who's very spiritual and very holy, shaking and baking and davening and learning and crying and laughing and fasting. It could quite well be that the guy with the torn pants and the ponytail and just saying to Hashem, God, help me, I need help. And he means it, right? He touches the essence, and the other guy just touches the spiritual part of God, which is great. But it's a box. It's a condition. It's a form. And the person who doesn't know any better, but he talks to Hashem, like we say, or like the Mendel Futterfass, the famous one, he came out of Russia, Chernovich, he came to London, and then putting on tefillin, and he goes out to the street, he doesn't know a word of English, he just says, he looks at someone, tefillin, and the guy hears a Hebrew word, he went to Talmud Torah, he knows tefillin. So and then he says, Jew? He asks, he says, yeah, Jew. He goes, you Jew, I Jew, tefillin, and he grabs his hand and he puts on tefillin. That's atzmus. You understand? That's atzmus. That's not true spirituality. Because in spirituality, it makes no sense. I didn't wash my hands before tefillin. I don't know what tefillin now. Leave me alone, and on and on. It makes no difference. We're going right for the heart, right for the essence, or we're going right up to God. His savos. So the Rebbe says here, look inside, guys. His savos, he may atzmus oirin sof baruch hu. Where does this creation come from? The essence, the atzmus of the infinite God. So listen to this. There is the energy, the or Hashem, that's Ein Sof, that's infinite. And although in most of the times we mean God with that saying, but in a discussion like we're having here, we have to make it clear that we're talking about the atzmus that the Ein Sof comes from. In other words, the infinity of God is also a condition in a box. You know what the box is? Infinity. So that energy is limited to infinity. Whereas atzmos is transcendence. Transcendence can be finite, it can be infinite. Whatever he, the creator, decides. So that's what he says here. Creation, where does the creation come from? His savus. He may atzmos say himself, Baruch Hu, the hu levadoi bekoicha v'yecholtei lahavos yesh me'ayin leyesh. That only he alone, with his strength and his ability, creates ex nihilo. Something, yesh me'ayin, from nothing. we refer to this aspect of God, Yoni, as ayin, because we, in our realm, we are already created, so we do not understand it. So to us, it's nada. It's nothing. But not nothing in a negative sense, nothing in a positive sense. It's so awesome, it's so transcendental, that the only way we can talk about it is as ayin. Uksiv, and then the verse says, Kail Hashem chofetz Hashem asa. Whatever Hashem wanted, chofetz, desired, he did. So why does the word chafetz used here? What's the chafetz is another is a synonym with the word ratzon, rotze. But it doesn't say rotze, it says chafetz. Why? Pchinas chafetz the uritzayin Hashem. We're talking about the inner aspect of God's desire, not just the external, superficial. It's another thought. Every line here is another thought. He says now, this koyach hayesavos that comes from atzmus, this energy, this transcendental energy, requires hislapshut, the investment of koyach hapoyel, of the power of the poel, the one doing, ba nifal, into what's being done and made. And if the koyach hapoyel is not in the nifal ceases to be. What is he saying over here? What he's saying in here is, because we're talking about atzmus, and we're talking about this experience, it requires that the world, that's the nifal in our case is the universe, the world, the creation, that the koyach hapoyel, which means God who has the koyach of poyel, of doing, must be invested. That's the chiddush here. So this is from Shara Yichid Emunah chapter 1. One word is the chiddush, the hislapshus. You could argue that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here meaning in the universe, but outside, and from where he is, he beams forth an energy, and he puts it into the universe, and it's so strong that it keeps you going. It's like a battery, right? You charge the battery for a certain amount of hours, and your cell phone works. Once the battery stops, your cell phone dies. It doesn't exist. You have to recharge it. So we could argue that, you know what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, from his position, beaming energy, and the energy is all-encompassing and all awesome, and because it comes from Hashem, that it has the koyach to sustain the world 6,000 years. But God is outside of creation. Says Chasidus, no, that's wrong. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hislapshut. You have to invest yourself, koyach hapoel b'nifal. And if you don't invest yourself, there's going to be a point where it ceases to be. For just taking an example, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, we say Shabbos in the section before Baruch Shamar, David HaMelech says, he says, go my son, go my son, go my son. So everyone asks the question, why does he say, go my son? He wants his son to learn from him. So what should he have said? Boena, come to me. And he says, L'chu, go. And the explanation is that only when he goes do you really know if he's listening to you. If your kid's next to you and doing what you want, you still don't know what's going to be after he leaves your home. But when he leaves your home and you see that he's following in the footsteps of you and your wife and everything else, Torah mitzvahs and the right way and all that, then you know that he got it. So I'm using that as an example. That's called Islapshus. Islapshus means that he's far away. He can be in Nariya, he can be in the Golan, he can be in Africa, he can be in New Mexico, he can be in Brooklyn, wherever he is. But he's walking around with you inside him, and he lives with that. That's an investment. That's a real investment. So the Eibishter HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mislabish the koyach hapoil in the nifal. And if he wouldn't be mislabish it, the nifal at some point would stop being the nifal. Or it wouldn't be the same nifal, the same result, the same creation. What time is it? I don't have a watch.
10 to 3, Rabbi.
What time?
2:50. 2:50, 10 to 3.
We'll stop here, and it's... what do you guys think about what we're learning today?
All right. In Yoni's case, it's 2:50.
Oh, it's only 2:30?
No, 50.
But what do you right?
That was a joke to Yoni.
I got it. But what do you think about what we learned today? The ideas, some deep ideas, no?
It's very deep.
Very deep. I don't think we can go fast on this.
I'm not going fast. Okay. I'm going slow. I'm not rushing. I mean, the Maamar's a long Maamar, but it's fine. I have nowhere to go. I'm not rushing. I'm going slow. I know these are new ideas, heavy ideas, and I need to discuss it. And if you have questions, you can either ask me here or on the WhatsApp. And everyone, have a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Zayt Batzliach. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.